Welcome to RC CAD2VR. I'm Terrence, so glad to have you on board. I've noticed lately that on Instagram I get asked, actually quite frequently, what are you using to design your L-1011? Well, I'm using a product called Fusion 360. It is free to download and free to use if you're using it for personal use. That's currently the version that I'm using. Fusion 360 does have a little bit of a learning curve. I do have to admit it took me a little bit of time to get it figured out. But once you understand some of the basics, it gets pretty simple to actually start developing your designs. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about how I used Fusion 360 to create the L-1011 and the renderings that you have seen on Instagram. I'm hoping that through this video, you'll learn some tips and tricks and techniques that I've learned in developing the L-1011. So without further ado, let's go ahead and head on back to the computer and check it out. Before we dive in, one of the key things that's important for everyone to understand is you're working on three axes. You're working on the Z-axis, which is typically up and down. You're working on the X-axis, which is usually the lateral axis. And then you're working on the Y-axis, which is oftentimes the depth of the model that you're working on. Now, you can choose whatever axis you want. There are conventions. However, whatever you choose, that's the one that you're going to be stuck with. So let's go ahead and dive into Fusion 360 now, and let's take a look at the axis and working with your origin points. So here on the screen, you can see we've got our origin. And the origin is basically the center point, or where everything is going to be drawn from. So if you're designing an airplane, you might say that the center point is at the center of gravity, or you might say the center point is at the nose, or however you decide to do that. Regardless of what you use the origin point for, you're going to use that for everything from that point out. So be very wise when you choose that. All right, so now that we have a basic understanding of working within Fusion 360 in three-dimensional space, let's go into how we actually start working on designing our airplane. Now, I chose the L-1011, and so I Googled online to find a diagram of the L-1011, and I was able to find a top-down view, a side view, and then a front dead-on view. And I used those within Fusion 360 to actually come up with the model. And we do that by using a canvas. Let's go into the interface now, and let's take a look and see how we do this. In order to get a canvas or an image onto our stage, what we need to do is we need to insert a canvas. And the way that we do that is up here, we click on Insert, and we have an option called Canvas. And in Canvas, I'm going to say Insert from Computer, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to find my file. So I'm going to choose this one, the profile, as my very first one. So it's going to ask you, which face do you want this canvas to be placed on? We've got three right now that we can choose from. And I'm going to choose this particular face, the YZ axis. And so I'm going to select that. And now it is there, you just can't really see it because it's very, very small. So I'm going to expand this. And then I'm going to place this to where the origin is going to sit in the very bottom corner of this diagram. You can actually scale this to a very specific dimension, which is what I did with my design, but I'm not going to go into detail on that. I will be producing a more in-depth video on using canvases and how to scale a plane from a diagram, but I'm not going to do that in this video. Make sure you check out my website, rccad2vr.com, where I will be publishing more of my detailed videos. Okay, that looks pretty good. So you can see here that we've got this as our YZ axis diagram. And that is now one canvas. Now I'm going to repeat this now for the top-down view and for the forward view. So I'm going to select another canvas, and this time I want to choose the footprint. So I'm going to open that, and again it's going to ask me which face. Well, this time I'm going to choose the XY axis. Okay, so once again I've now got this tiny little image here, but what I want to do is I want to scale this again, and I'm going to do 20. And obviously this orientation is not right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this by pulling on this little handle, or I can just do 90 degrees. And there we have 90 degrees. And then I'm going to move this into position like I did the other. So now we can see I have got two planes with canvases on them for scaling the plane. Now the last thing that I need is to add the forward view. So again, go to Canvas, and then this time I want to make sure I'm picking the elevation, or the forward elevation, and I'm going to select this, and we're going to go through that one more time. And I'm going to move this up, but this time I want to align the top because I want to make sure that my tail is aligned. See, we've got over here we've got the tail. I need to make sure that this point is aligned with that. So there we go. Hit OK. And there we have it. Now we've got the three sides or three dimensions that we need to actually start working on our airplane. All right, so that's pretty cool, isn't it? To be able to have those three sides in there that you can now work from to actually shape your model. Now that we've got those three views in there, or those three canvases, let's go ahead and start with our first shape. The way that we do this is by using a sketch. And a sketch, you can think of it as pretty much taking a sheet of paper and drawing out some sort of a two-dimensional design. We're going to do the same thing in Fusion 360, and from there we're going to start actually building the base parts for the airframe. What I want to do is I want to start working on the fuselage and all of the body parts that are going to create the fuselage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the cylinder. So I'm going to select Sketch, and then it's going to ask me which face I want to sketch on. And because I'm wanting to do the front view, this straight down the center view, what I want to do is I need to select this face because that's the face I'm drawing on. And so now it's activated, and you can see the sketch palette is over here. And now I've got a whole bunch of tools across the top for sketching. Now I'm going to turn my canvases back on, and I'm going to zoom in here because the first thing that I want to do is I want to create the main cylinder shape of the fuselage. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to use this tool, and which is the circle tool. And to make sure that I get this right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this 2-point circle, which will allow me to use the top and the bottom as my reference points. So I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to start up here, and then I'm going to come down here to this point right here, and voila. Now I've got the cylinder shape. The next thing I want to do is, now that I've got the cylinders, I want to actually create the former itself and how I'm going to extrude and create a body that I'm going to then run the length of the fuselage. And the way that I like to do that is I actually like to use the offset tool. And then with the offset tool, you select the shape that you're wanting to, or the sketch curve. You select that, and you can see now I've got this this red area here. And that is where I'm going to create another shape. And I'm going to bring this in, I'll say right about there. When I hit OK, we can now see that I've got two of these. So I'm going to turn off this canvas. So now I've got two shapes. And when I highlight inside of one of these, you can see it darkens. Or I can highlight this one and it darkens. Not too shabby, right? Well, the next thing that I also want to do is I want to create this internal structure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the line tool, and I'm going to come out here and I'm going to draw a line all the way across until it snaps in place, and you'll see the little X there. And I'm going to do that. And then instead of doing the same thing again, what I like to do is I'll actually use the offset tool again. This time for this particular line, and I'm going to bring this down to match here. I'm going to hit OK. Alright, so now we've got our basic shape. Now what I want to do is I want to take this sketch and I want to actually convert it into a three-dimensional body. And the way that we do that is we select the areas that we want to extrude. So I'm going to select these. And now you can see I've got three of them selected. I'm going to now turn this. What I want to do is I want to extrude. And the way that you can do that is by hitting E. And you can see now I've got this little arrow here, which is going to allow me to extrude off of this. And I'm going to pull this out. And there you can see now I have got a three-dimensional shape. And then I'm going to select OK. And I'm going to turn off my sketches to really get a good view of this. Now I've got my very first body. Now the issue here is that this body now sits on this particular plane in the very front of the aircraft, which that doesn't make sense because it actually needs to be somewhere around here. Well, the way that we're going to move that is we're going to take this shape and I'm going to select this body priority, which will allow me to select the body in its entirety. And then I'm going to press M for move. And now you can see I've got the 3-axis move. And the origin point for this particular body is down here in this corner. And you can see that it's a different origin than our main stage origin. So anything that we do to this shape is always going to be based off of this position. Now what I want to do is I actually want to move this backwards. So I'm going to press this in the direction that I'm wanting to move, and I'm going to turn my canvases back on. And I'm going to look at my right view, so I'm looking at it this way. And I'm going to just click and pull this until I'm in roughly the right place. So I'm going to say that looks about right. And now my body sits roughly where I want it to be. Now that we've got this body, the next thing we want to do is we want to actually create a good portion of the fuselage from the nose section where we finally have the full shape of the fuselage all the way to where the back of the plane is and it starts to taper. Now we can do this by replicating the steps that we just did over and over and over again, but that would be silly. Instead, we're going to use a tool called the pattern tool. The pattern tool is going to allow us to actually recreate that body several times along an axis. I'll show you how it's done. We're going to use a pattern tool. And the pattern tool is going to allow us to replicate this shape many times down the fuselage. The way that we do that is by clicking on our body. So we've got this selected now. And I'm going to come up here to create. And if you scroll about 3/4 of the way down, you'll see pattern. And I'm going to select rectangular pattern. Now, right now, we haven't selected a direction that we want this to go in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the directions and select this. and I want it to be on this particular direction right here. I want this along the y-axis. So I select Y. Now you can see I've got this little arrow that pops up, which will allow me to start pulling that shape in that direction. But I need to have a reference point here, so I'm going to turn my canvas back on to see what I'm working with. And I'm going to go back to this right view here. I'm going to pull this all the way back to roughly about here. Now, 3 is not going to be enough, so I'm going to boost this up, and I'm going to try 12. Maybe not 12, maybe 10. Alright, so if I'm happy with 10, now I've got 10 of these that form the central part of the fuselage before we taper in the end and before the body shapes towards the nose. And I'm going to hit OK. Now we can see we've got the beginnings of a fuselage. And just in a couple of clicks and just a few minutes, we've already got the beginnings of an airplane. So one thing that I noticed was I actually left out one of the vertical supports under the cross support. What I want to do is I want to add that support in. Now, normally if you had history mode turned on, you would actually do this within your sketch. However, because I recommended in the beginning that we don't have history turned on, what we're going to do is we're going to back out a little bit and get back to our original shape, and then we're going to create or modify that body and create the vertical support. Then I'm going to show you how to make it symmetrical. It's pretty easy to do, and I'll show you how to do it now. Now, one of the ways that you can do this is through Sketch, and when you make a modification to your sketch, it makes a modification to the bodies that were based off of that sketch. However, I'm not going to do it that way. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come in here and I'm going to delete these bodies. So one of the things that I left out is the vertical support. These vertical supports are not within my body. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add them in. And in order to do that, what I need to do is I need to add to this particular body. So I'm going to come up here and select the box tool. And then I'm going to select the face that I'm going to work from. So I'm going to click here. And this is going to create just a box that's now part of this, this body. And I'm going to pull this down a little bit. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this back here. And I want this to align to the back. And right now this red means that I'm actually cutting into the body, and that's not what I want to do. I actually want to join. And that's done over here in the box panel. So I'm going to hit join. Now you can see it looks more like one body. Now that's not quite the right shape just yet, so I'm going to go back to my front view. I'm going to turn on my canvas so I can see what I'm working with. And I'm going to pull this over, just so I can roughly get this shape. And then this one right about there. Okay, and I hit OK, and what we will see is I now have that support. So now that I've got this added support in place, it's obvious that I need to do it to the other side. But doing it freehand isn't going to get you to a symmetrical space. Now mind you, again, this is something that you typically will do in a sketch, but for the sake of this demonstration, I want to show you how you actually can modify an existing body that might not have a sketch. The way that I go about doing that is I actually use something called a construction plane. A construction plane is basically one of these little doodads. And to get one, I'm going to say I want a construction plane by clicking up here. And then it's going to ask me what plane I want that construction plane to be on. And that's going to be this one. And the reason I'm choosing this particular plane is because this is the center point that goes right down the center of our fuselage. So I'm going to select that and hit OK. Now what I want to do is I want to extend this up. I'm going to pull this all the way back to the very end of the fuselage. And I'm going to make sure that this stretches down below and that it gets up past the top. So what this is going to allow us to do is this is now our center plane. If we need to mirror anything from one side to the other, this will be the plane that we use to do the mirroring. So I'm going to turn off my canvases. So what I want to do is I want to get this side to mirror onto this side. Well, in order to do that, I actually need to now cut this shape. And I'm going to do that by using the split body tool. And it's going to ask me which body. So I select this body, and then it's going to ask me what tool. The tool is going to be the plane. And by selecting the plane, now it shows you what's being cut. I say OK. And now if we look in our bodies, we've got two bodies, the left side and the right side. Now, I'm going to turn off my construction plane, and you will see now that I've got two bodies. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to select this body and I'm going to delete it. Now I've got one half and it sits directly on the center point or the center plane right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mirror this, and I'm going to go to Create and then Mirror. And it's going to ask me what plane do I want to do this on, and I'm going to say on my construction plane I'm going to select that. Now you can see there's a little bit of a preview there. I hit OK. I'm going to turn off my construction plane, and now you can see I've got a symmetrical body. It's kind of like magic, isn't it? The fact that you can take a design, cut it in half, and then mirror it just like that. That's the power of CAD, and that's a very simple thing to do. You can replicate this in many different places whenever you need something. As a matter of fact, if you take a look at the wing, you can see it on Instagram or you can see it on RC CAD2VR.com. The wings are actually mirrored in this same exact way. So I took the entire component of one wing and I only had to design one, and then I used that center mirror plane to mirror the other side. And anytime I make a change to one, I easily can make that mirror and get it onto the other side. That way I don't have to duplicate two wings to try to get them to be symmetrical. By using the mirror tool, it is going to be symmetrical. Alright, so in the next video, I'm going to be talking about how I designed the wing, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail than I did in this particular video. So if you're interested in airfoils and how to design a wing in Fusion 360, hit that subscribe button, make sure you hit the bell, that way you get notified right away as soon as I upload that video. Until then, thanks for watching, I really appreciate your support, and happy modeling. Till then, take care.